KT McFarland, former Trump administration Deputy National Security Advisor, author of Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People. KT, welcome. So a lot to keep in mind here. We've got Vladimir Putin firing missiles into Ukraine. You just heard from the Ukrainian president there. And then also a new headline, Germany signing off, lifting restrictions on Kyiv to fire long-range missiles into Russia. Could you talk to us about what this means for the current state of the war?
You know, to me, the most discouraging thing about the state of the war is what President Trump said over the weekend, where he said, I don't know what's happened to Putin. Is he gone crazy? Does he just want to fight forever? Maybe he really doesn't want peace. And if that's the case, if President Trump is determined, despite all of the efforts to get President Putin to the negotiating table, that Putin just wants to fight on and fight on forever, even though it's against the interests of his country, even though people are getting killed, his own people, as well as civilians everywhere in Ukraine and Russia, then it's very difficult to see how you stop Vladimir Putin under the current situation. Now, what are President Trump's options? You could do secondary sanctions. They're really, you know, they would be such extraordinary sanctions against Russia that Russia would have great difficulty surviving economically if President Trump were to go in that direction.
Yeah, kind of on that same, sentiment. Pennsylvania Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick is the co-chair of the House Ukrainian Caucus. He posted on X over the weekend, writing this: the United States cannot fail to respond as Putin escalates his barbaric assault on innocent Ukrainians. Congress must act immediately and decisively. We need full crippling sanctions targeting Putin, his regime, and those bankrolling this campaign of terror until the Russian war machine collapses in on itself. Peace through strength begins with action. So you talked a little bit about sanctions. Aside from the president, is there something that Congress can step up and do? Is there actions that Congress could take?
Yeah, so here's how the sanctions work. We don't trade much with Russia, so we can put sanctions on Russia. It doesn't matter much. The things that matter to Russia are, can it sell its oil and natural gas around the world? Something like 75% of its income, national income, comes from selling oil and natural gas. So Russia is prevented and banned from selling to a lot of countries, but nobody's really enforcing it. And some of the European countries like Germany, they still continue to import Russian natural gas, enriching Russia. Other countries like India import Russian oil, again, making Russia a pretty rich country because the price of oil is high. As President Trump drives down the prices of oil and natural gas because American exports come on the market, that means Putin's income is diminished. But there's another way to really cut him off at the knees, and that is sanctions imposed by Congress or with the president or in conjunction, and that is to say we will do secondary sanctions. So that means we go to any of these countries, Germany, India, and say, look, you have a deal. You want to continue to import energy from Russia, making Russia rich, or do you want to trade with America? You can't trade with both. At which point all the countries will say, well, you know, we can't forego the American market. And so those are secondary sanctions, and that would crush the Russian economy very quickly.
Sure. Then you'd think that folks in Russia would be very frustrated with that situation here. I mean, at what point, KT, are you just seeing Ukrainian fighters, Russian fighters say, I'm done fighting, we're not making any progress here?
You know, Emma, that's a really good question, and here's why. Putin has spent the last several years really focusing on telling his people about Russian nationalism and be a great patriot and suffer for Russia. 8 years ago, even 4 years ago, the public opinion polls in Russia said that most of the Russians were concerned about the economy and their standard of living. That's all changed in the last several years. They're now concerned about great Russian nationalism. So as much as we look at it and scratch our heads, the Russian people are behind Putin in what he's doing in Ukraine. So he's got a lot of popular support to continue to fight.
Yeah, again, still firing upon Ukraine, even though they have touted, those Russian spokespersons, they have touted that they're ready for peace talks and this is going to happen, but though their actions do not match up with those words. KT McFarland joining us with that. KT, always good to see you. Thank you for that.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.